Mother's Day morning arrives like a quiet apology no one delivers. The light comes in soft through the blinds, spreading across the kitchen tile in slow rectangles. I wake before anyone else, though that's not unusual. Not the kind of day you expect to sleep through, not when you've lived in a house full of calendars and reminders and fridge magnets. Still, the silence hangs around my shoulders like an old shawl I didn't realize I'd put on. I boil water for tea, not coffee. I don't want the energy. I want the stillness, the way it curls around the edges of an ordinary Sunday pretending to be something else. No one stirs upstairs. No one calls out. No footsteps. It's just the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the creak of wood cooling beneath the weight of sleep. When the dishwasher finishes its cycle, I open it without drama, letting the steam fog my face for a moment. There's something oddly holy about clean plates, the quiet clink of each one sliding into its place. A rhythm I've known for years. No morning, rinse, stack, close. The kitchen has its own heartbeat, even when the people in it forget how. To listen, no flowers, no card. Not even the digital chirp of a text. I tell myself I don't need any of it, that it's fine, that I'm fine. And in some small, strange way, I am. But there's a difference between not needing something and not noticing its absence. I notice the missing vase on the counter. I notice the absence of burnt toast, the kind they used to make me laughing as the smoke curled upward. I notice the quiet. It isn't peaceful. It's just quiet. Mark comes down a little after 9 in the shirt he slept in, scrolling through his phone before his eyes have even adjusted to the light. He walks past me, says nothing, sits at the kitchen island and starts replying to emails. I wonder if the glow from the screen feels warmer to him than the sunlight coming through the window. I wonder if he even knows what day it is. I place a mug beside him, black coffee, the way he takes it. He mumbles something that might be thanks, but I don't really catch it. I nod anyway. The dishwasher is empty now. The sink is clean. I have nothing left to do with my hands. I lean against the counter and watch the steam rise from his cup. The stepkids don't come down. One of them might still be asleep. The other probably already in a game, headset on, lost in some world where Mother's Day isn't marked on the map. It's not their fault, I suppose. Maybe Mark didn't say anything. Maybe no one said anything. Maybe it slipped through the cracks of a house too full of distractions and passwords and people too used to things being done without being noticed. I think about the year Emily drew me a card in pink crayon and spelled mom backwards. Proud she was when I taped it to the fridge. I think about the time Lucas brought me a plastic flower from the corner store and said, "It's not real, but it'll never die." I still have it somewhere. I forget where. It's not anger I feel, not bitterness. Something gentler, stranger, like forgetting the taste of something you once loved. You don't miss it in the sharp way. You miss it like an echo, a scent left in an old sweater, song you can hum but no longer sing. I don't remind anyone. I don't drop hints. I don't say, guess what day it is. I just exist. I load the dishwasher. I wipe the counter. I refill the fruit bowl. I sweep a crumb no one else sees. I move through the house like I'm made of smoke. And yet I'm still here, still standing in this kitchen that once felt like mine, that used to smell like cinnamon and burnt coffee and overcooked eggs made by small hands trying too hard. That used to ring with laughter and apologies and tiny voices shouting, "It's today." Now the only sound is the ticking of the clock, slow and even. I glance at it. 10:15, somewhere in someone else's home. A vase overflows. A phone chimes with messages and voice notes and emojis shaped like hearts. Somewhere, someone is being remembered. Here, in this house. The day folds in on itself like a napkin after a meal no one served. And I let it quietly, without complaint, just the soft scrape of the dishwasher drawer. The low sip of cooling tea and the unspoken realization that some things don't break loudly. Some things just fade, and no one notices until they're all ready. Gone. I remember the first dinner like it was wrapped in soft around the edges, but sharp when you touched it wrong. It was a Sunday, early spring, the kind of day that pretends to be warm if you stand in the sun long enough. Mark had asked me to come meet his family. He said it casually, like we were just dropping by. But everything about it felt orchestrated. The house was bigger than I expected. Polished, not flashy, but the kind of polish that comes from generations of people caring how they appear. When the front door opened, Colleen was already mid-smile, too bright, too quick, like it had been practiced. She hugged Mark and glanced at me like I was a package left on the porch. She called out for her mother, voice thin and high, and then turned to me with a tone that sounded sweet but landed somewhere colder. "You must be the new girl," she said. I smiled too wide, said yes, and offered the bottle of wine I'd picked up. Red, medium-bodied, something I couldn't pronounce but had Googled for an hour. She took it like she was checking a box. Inside, the house smelled like lemon polish and pot roast. Irene emerged from the kitchen holding a ladle, her apron still pressed. She looked me over not in a cruel way, but in that deeply maternal, deeply territorial way that older women sometimes do when their sons bring someone home. She didn't smile. Not really. Just nodded and said, "So you're the one." Like a statement from the jury. We ate in the dining room, even though the kitchen table was closer and warmer. I took the seat offered to me at the end, far from Mark. I don't remember if I volunteered or was placed there, but either way, I sat like someone on trial. The room was all soft light and brittle politeness. I tried to laugh when they made jokes I didn't understand, mostly about people not present. I kept my posture straight, used the good napkin. Didn't ask for salt. Colleen brought out dessert halfway through, apple pie in a foil tin with the label peeled half off. "Homemade," she announced, sliding it onto the table. No one blinked. I wondered for a moment if they all shared the same unspoken agreement to pretend together. The pie was too sweet, with a hint of something artificial. I told her it was lovely. She didn't thank me, just offered more. Though no one else accepted, Irene asked questions like she was cataloging me, where I worked, where I grew up, whether my parents were still around. When I mentioned my mother, she said, "Oh, a teacher." That explains the tone. I smiled, unsure what she meant, but certain it wasn't a compliment. The kids' marks from his first marriage stayed in the living room. I didn't meet them that night. Irene said they had had a long day and were tired. I nodded. That's all I seemed to do that evening. Nod, smile, try to belong. Mark didn't say much. He looked relaxed, almost proud, like bringing me there had already secured some kind of approval. He didn't see the way Irene's gaze lingered on my hands when I reached for my glass, or how Colleen's questions always ended in silence, like little traps waiting to be filled. After dinner, I offered to help clean up. Irene said no, and Colleen said she doesn't let anyone touch her kitchen. It was framed as a compliment, but sounded more like a boundary. I stood awkwardly by the sink until Mark said we should head out in the car. I asked what they thought. He said they liked you. My mom said you were polite. I remember nodding again, feeling my jaw ached from all the effort it had taken to stay pleasant. I leaned my head against the window and watched the trees blur past, their branches bare, but beginning to bud. I told myself I'd try harder next time, that it was just the first dinner, that families have layers and rules you can learn, like a second language. I told myself I could earn my place, and for a while, I believed it. The first birthday after I married into the family was the kind of day that tries its best to be ordinary. It rained lightly that morning, just enough to blur the windows, but not enough to need an umbrella. I remember watching the drops slide down the glass while the house moved around me, the rhythm of shoes on tile, notifications pinging from someone's pocket, drawers opening and closing without a word. Mark had said he'd handle everything. "Don't lift a finger," he told me the night before. placing a quick kiss on my shoulder as he reached over me for the remote. I wanted to believe him. I always did. Even then, the kids were half draped. Over the couch when I came downstairs, their faces lit in cold blue from their screens. No happy birthday, no glance in my direction. Just the sounds of tapping and scrolling, the occasional laugh from a video I wasn't invited to hear. I told myself it was fine. They were teenagers. That's what teenagers do. Colleen arrived 20 minutes late with a gift bag that still had the store tag on the handle. She hugged me too tightly and then stepped back to inspect my face like she was adjusting a painting. She tilted her head and smiled. "You're getting a little gray, huh? Suits you though. Very ... wise woman energy." I smiled. Or I think I did. That kind of smile you give when your body does the politeness before your brain catches up. The cake didn't come. Mark had forgotten to pick it up. He offered to go get one, but I said not to bother. I didn't want a rushed apology and buttercream. Instead, I cut into a backup lemon loaf we had in the freezer. It was dry, but I didn't mind. The candles were left over from someone else's birthday, mismatched 6 and a 1 from last year. We made it work. No one noticed. They sang out of tune and half-hearted, while the frosting began to sweat under the warmth of the flames. Someone's phone rang in the middle, and they picked up without stepping out of the room. I blew out the candles while Mark was texting. No one clapped in the photos. I look fine. Not happy, not hurt, just fine. I smiled with my lips closed. I stood with my hands folded in front of me like a guest at my own party. Later, when Mark posted a picture with the caption, "Celebrating this amazing woman today," I liked it from my account. Out of habit more than feeling. That evening, while everyone laughed at something on TV, I scraped melted icing off the countertop and folded the used napkins into one small stack. I watched Colleen sip wine and lean into Mark's shoulder, like she belonged there more than I did. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care to shift. I told myself none of it mattered. That birthdays are just days. That what matters is the life around them. The routine, the shared spaces, the quiet gestures. But even as I thought it, I felt something shift small, but definite. Like a picture frame slowly tilting on the wall. Not enough to fall. It's just enough to catch your eye. It wasn't pain exactly, not yet. Just a kind of soft erasure. Like watching someone draw a circle around you but leave your name out. I went to bed early that night claiming a headache. Mark didn't ask which kind. I lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, carrying on without me the clink of a glass, the low hum of the TV. The soft click of a door closing down the hall. It was the first birthday I didn't cry on, and somehow that made it feel worse. The road was familiar. But the morning wasn't. It had that tight, filtered light you only get when the clouds hang low and the sun pretends it doesn't want to rise. I had offered to drive Colleen too. Brunch, or maybe she'd asked. Can't remember now. It had felt harmless at the time, an easy favor. A quiet ride through town. She wore her usual sunglasses, the big ones that cover half her face, even though the sky was the color of dishwater and not a shadow in sight. Her perfume filled the car before she spoke, a sharp, citrus thing that made the air feel too awake. I had rolled the window down a crack. Quietly, we passed the florist near Maine. The one that used to have hand-painted signs in the window but had switched to vinyl. Banners last year. Colleen was scrolling through her phone, thumb moving fast, her face unreadable behind the lenses. She asked if Mark had remembered to RSVP for the brunch. When I said yes, she made a sound like a laugh, but with no humor in it. Then she asked if I planned to do anything for myself this year. Her words. Exactly, with the kind of soft bite you don't recognize until the bruise forms later. I said I hadn't thought about it. She tilted her head and said, "That's what I thought," as if I'd confirmed something she'd suspected all along. I kept both hands on the wheel. I kept my voice even. The GPS was guiding us down the usual route until suddenly it wasn't. The voice cut out. The screen froze. then blinked back on with a new path, a longer one. We turned off the main road and into a neighborhood I didn't know. The houses looked tired chipped shutters, porches that leaned. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence felt heavy. Not awkward, but weighted, like we were both carrying something and pretending not to. I wondered if Colleen had always spoken in undercurrents, or if I'd just started learning how to hear them. Maybe I used to take her words at face value, brushing off the sharpness as sarcasm, the judgment as concern. But now, in the stillness of the car, it all rang different. Too smooth, too practiced, like someone who knew how to strike without, leaving a mark. She asked about the kids, how they were doing in school, whether Emily still played piano. I answered politely, watching the turns, trying to get us back to a road I recognized. She nodded too slowly, the way people do when they're pretending to listen but really just cataloging what they've already decided. We passed a small lake, its surface gray and flat as slate. I thought about pulling over, just for a minute, to breathe without the air feeling shaped by someone else. But I didn't. I kept driving. She started talking about her job, a new promotion that came with a ridiculous amount of responsibility. I congratulated her. She said thanks, but in a tone that made it sound like I had no idea what that kind of work entailed. I let it pass. Most things did with her. 15 minutes lost, then found again. The GPS caught up with us, told us to turn left. Colleen adjusted her sunglasses, even though the sky hadn't changed. She said brunch would probably be late anyway. I said nothing. When we arrived, she stepped out without waiting for me to stop the engine fully. She smoothed her hair, looked at her reflection in the side mirror, and smiled. "You're a good sport," she said, like it was a compliment, or maybe a warning. I watched her walk toward the restaurant, heels clicking against the sidewalk like punctuation marks on a sentence I hadn't written. I sat in the car a little longer, the engine idling, my hands still on the wheel. Small breath came out of me, too quiet to be called a sigh. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside me had shifted, just a little. The kind of shift you only feel when you realize someone has been speaking in a different language all along and you've finally begun to translate. The receipt was folded twice and barely visible, tucked beneath the seat cushion like it had slipped and then decided to stay hidden. I hadn't meant to find it. I was looking for a pen, something simple, something ordinary. But my fingers brushed paper instead, and I pulled it out without thinking. Just a piece of thermal paper, faded at the edges, still warm from the sun. Through the windshield, dot flowers, candy, a card, dated May 9th. 3 days before Mother's Day. My breath didn't catch. My pulse didn't spike. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was smaller, quieter, like the last grain of sugar dissolving in a cup of tea. I stared at it for a few seconds, long enough to read the name of the store, the exact items. Long enough to know. And then I folded it back the way I found it. Tucked it under the seat again, a secret returned to its hiding place. I sat in the car for a while, keys still in my hand, door cracked open just enough to hear the distant sounds of a lawnmower. Somewhere down the street, the air smelled like cut grass and exhaust. The kind of afternoon you don't remember until something brands itself into it. I didn't ask, I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice or throw open drawers looking for more proof. I didn't even cry. What I felt wasn't sharp. It didn't bleed. It was more like the air leaving a room you didn't realize was pressurized. The slow, silent collapse of something that had been swollen and suspended too long. That night, over dinner, Mark mentioned he was swamped at work. Said it like a man offering a neutral excuse, something solid and believable. I nodded. I poured him another glass of water, stirred the soup, slowly, so it wouldn't stick to the bottom of the pot. I asked if he wanted crackers. He said no, thanks. Later, when the dishes were drying and the lights were low, I made tea. Not for him, just for me. It's the kind I save for evenings when I need to feel like something is still warm and mine. I stood by the window as the kettle steamed, watching the porch light flicker in the breeze. Mark was in the living room, half watching. The news, phone in hand, scrolling with that rhythmic swipe he never seemed to notice he did. I thought about the card, the flowers, the candy. I wondered if she smiled when she opened them, if she thought of me at all, or if he had framed it as innocent. Just a gesture, just a favor, just a thank you. That word, just how often it's used to shrink a thing until it barely fits in the sentence. I didn't know who she was. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe it didn't matter. The truth wasn't in the details. It was in the decision. The choice to plan, to pay, to fold the receipt and not even throw it away. I didn't feel rage. I felt something older, something rooted. Like the first crack in a frozen lake, not loud, not dangerous yet, but enough to tell you spring is coming. And nothing will stay solid much longer. I went to bed before he did, left the tea steeping on the counter. I lay in the dark and stared. At the ceiling, tracing the faint lines in the paint like they might spell something. I listened to the familiar sounds, his footsteps, the click of the lamp, the soft thud of his phone on the nightstand. He kissed my shoulder and whispered good night. I said it back. But in my mind, something had begun. Not a plan exactly. Just a countdown. A quiet awareness that a clock had started ticking. Not in revenge, not in fury, in preparation. The envelope came folded among the coupons and supermarket flyers. Unremarkable at first glance, thin paper, a plastic window, the familiar logo in soft blue. I opened it out of habit, not urgency. Sitting at the kitchen table with a lukewarm mug of coffee and a dish towel still damp from the sink. The date was printed. Clearly, May 12th, just one day after Mother's Day. The renewal notice sat there quietly, asking nothing, just a polite reminder that something important needed tending to. I held it for a moment, felt the weight of a light but not empty. I ran my thumb over the crease, smoothing it flat. Then I folded it again, slowly, and placed it in the drawer near the fridge. The one where old menus go. It's the one no one else. Checks. The drawer didn't resist. Swallowed the notice like it had been expecting it. It wasn't a decision, not really. More like an exhale. That night, Mark mentioned a trip, something about needing the car for a quick drive out of town. To see a client. His voice was casual, distracted. He spoke while tying his shoelace, half looking at his phone. I nodded. That was all. I didn't say anything about the envelope. I didn't remind him, didn't offer to handle it or mark it on the calendar, or log into the website and renew it for him the way I used to do. There was a time when I would have double-checked the details, printed confirmations, made a file. I would have worried about what might happen if it lapsed. I would have cared more about keeping the house running than whether anyone noticed who kept it that way. But something inside me had shifted. It wasn't spite. It wasn't even hurt. It was recognition. If no one sees the invisible work, then maybe they won't notice when it disappears. If no one thanks the hands that hold the net, they probably won't see the moment those hands let go. Mark refilled his water and kissed my cheek in passing. I smiled with my lips closed, then turned off the kettle that had been warming for tea I no longer wanted. The kitchen was dim, just one light above the sink. The kind of light that softens everything, the pile of unopened mail, the coffee ring on the counter. The edges of a life you've built by instinct more than intention. I stood there for a while, looking at the shadows cast by the blinds. They stretched long across the floor, quiet and precise. The house was silent in a way that didn't feel empty, just honest. Mark went upstairs. I stayed behind, wiping down the table out of rhythm, rinsing a glass I hadn't used, checking the window latch even though it hadn't been opened in weeks. These small rituals, these daily invisibilities. I opened the drawer again, slowly. The envelope was still there, still waiting, still silent. I closed it again. The next morning, I didn't bring it up. I packed Mark's lunch like usual, down to the extra fork. I left it on the counter with a note that said drive safe, though the words felt lighter than they used to. He smiled when he saw it, told me I was sweet. Ha! I returned the smile, knowing sweetness is sometimes mistaken for softness, for passivity. But I wasn't soft. Not anymore. It's just quiet. And sometimes quiet is the only sound a boundary makes when it finally lands. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. The kind of quiet day when nothing feels urgent. The laundry was half done. The kettle had just clicked off, and the house smelled faintly of lemon and fabric softener. I was folding towels when the phone rang an unfamiliar number. Long and uneven. I almost didn't answer, but something in me paused. And I pressed the green circle. Mark's voice came through tinny, a little breathless. He said the car had broken. Down on the side of the highway, something about smoke, or maybe steam rising from under the hood. He was calling from a gas station clerk's phone. Had to leave his in the car because the charger cable wasn't working. I didn't say much. Just listened. Then he mentioned the insurance. Asked if I'd gotten the renewal done. His tone changed, not angry, not accusatory, just surprised. Like he'd discovered the stove had been off all along and couldn't understand how dinner hadn't. Made itself anyway. I told him I'd look into it. Later, there was a silence after that. Not long. Just long enough for something to settle. He asked if I could maybe call them now, just to check. I told him I was in the middle of something. Pause. Then he said okay, but I could hear it just beneath the surface. The slow dawning of consequence. The quiet panic of someone realizing the invisible safety net might actually be gone. We said goodbye politely. When I hung up, I didn't feel anything close to triumph. No victory. No satisfaction. I just felt light. Like something heavy had finally slipped off my shoulders without making a sound. I looked down at the towels still warm from the dryer. Their edges soft, their folds familiar. I finished stacking them, not quickly, not with purpose, just rhythm. Hands moving like they'd always done. There was no bitterness in the room. No heat. Only air. The kind that drifts in through an open window when no one's watching, I thought. About the envelope in the drawer, the one with the renewal notice still creased along the fold. I thought about how many years I'd spent keeping things from unraveling, not because anyone asked me to, but because they never thought to. How many meals? How many calendars? How many reminders sent quietly through text or tacked onto the fridge with cheerful magnets. And how none of it had ever really been seen. Mark had always assumed I'd handled it. The bills, the schedules, the little things that make a life smooth. He called it keeping us on track. I used to call it love. Now, I wasn't sure what to call it. The truth is, I hadn't forgotten the insurance. I'd read the letter. I'd touched the paper. I'd felt its weight and made a choice not out of malice. But clarity, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I needed to know what would happen if I simply didn't catch the fall. Now I knew. A stalled car, a borrowed phone. A voice on the other end beginning to recognize the space he used to assume would always close behind him. I made myself a cup of tea, let it steep longer than I usually do, sat at the kitchen table with the steam curling gently into the air. I didn't call the insurance company, I didn't open the drawer, I didn't move. I just sat, not angry, not proud, just ... Here, breathing in a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. A kind of freedom that didn't announce itself loudly. Just arrived and took a seat beside me like it had always belonged. Colleen's message came mid-morning. Just one line. No greeting, no punctuation. Are you mad about something? I read it twice, then set my phone face down on the kitchen counter. The tile was cool beneath my elbows as I leaned forward, waiting for something, an impulse to respond. Maybe? But it didn't come. Irene's voicemail arrived an hour later, her voice soft, rehearsed. She said she was just checking in. Wondered if everything was all right. Said she hoped I was taking care of myself. The tone was measured. Concern without apology. Curiosity without ownership. No one mentioned Mother's Day. Not the empty table. Not the silence. Not the weight of a day that had passed through the house unnoticed. Like a shadow slipping under a closed door. I let both messages sit. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said through absence. It was cloudy when I left for the store. That kind of dull gray sky that doesn't make promises neither rain nor sun. It's just an in-between kind of light. The parking lot was half full. I walked slowly, hands in my jacket pockets, letting the sliding doors open around me like I'd earned the space. No list. No rush. I wandered past the aisles like a visitor, stopping in front of the flower stand without meaning to. Everything looked too bright at first. Pink roses, dyed daisies, cellophane crinkling beneath overhead lights. But then I saw them. Pale tulips. Soft yellow, with edges just beginning to curl. Quiet. Unassuming. I picked them up not for show, not to hint. Just because I wanted to hold something beautiful without permission. The stems were cool, damp at the base. Carried them with both hands like something sacred. In the checkout line, I felt their petals brush against my wrist, barely there. Soft and unbruised. The woman behind the counter asked if I wanted them wrapped. I said no. She nodded and scanned them gently, placing them back into my arms as if she understood. Back home. I trimmed the stems and set them in a glass, used to keep for special occasions. Irene's voice still lingered in my voicemail. Colleen's text still glowed quietly on my screen. I didn't answer either, not to be cruel, not to be distant, but because sometimes silence is the only honest language left. They didn't ask what they had missed, only why I had become quiet, as if the absence of compliance were the real betrayal, as if my stillness was a disruption, not a decision. The flowers looked softer in the afternoon light, not bright, not showy. Just enough. I moved through the rest of the day without explanation, placing things where they belonged. A mug back on its shelf. A folded towel. A quiet breath. And though no one else saw it, I knew something had shifted. I was no longer waiting to be remembered. I renewed the policy a few weeks later. Logged in, filled the forms, entered the card details. No urgency, no reminder. Just a quiet task folded into an afternoon, like any other. Not out of kindness, not to be good, but for closure. Mark never brought it up. Not after the call, not after the breakdown. It drifted into the silence between us, buried beneath daily noise. Sound of drawers closing, keys dropping into bowls, dinner plates cleared without comment. He asked if I'd be home next weekend. I said, probably. He nodded. That was it. The stepkids stayed busy, phones in hand, doors mostly closed. They laughed sometimes at things I couldn't hear. I didn't lean in. I didn't ask. Colleen posted a photo the following Sunday, her at some rooftop place, all sunlit glass and curated plates, her face angled just right. The caption said, brunching with the best. Family love is everything. I watched from a distance, not bitter, just awake. It's strange how far away things can feel, even when they're still technically yours. A name on the deed. A toothbrush. In the cup. A voice calling your name, but never asking who you really are. There was a time I would have seen that post and wondered what I'd done wrong. Whether I'd been too quiet, too soft, too slow to respond. I would have examined my own shadow like it was evidence of a crime. But now I just closed the app. Mother's Day came again. Slower this time. No sharp edges. No expectations. I didn't look at the calendar. I didn't make a list. I went out that morning before anyone else was up. Walked through the open field near the trail where the grass brushes against your ankles, and the air smells faintly of earth and distant blooms. I picked the wildflowers myself. No bouquet, no ribbon. Just stems snapped gently between my fingers, colors soft and uneven, like something meant to be found, not bought. I placed them in the same glass on the kitchen table, the one I used for the tulips. It's the one that didn't. Need a reason anymore? No one asked who they were from? No one commented. The day passed without interruption. Mark had a work call. The kids went out. I sat in the sunlight and read something I didn't intend to finish. I drank tea without sugar. That there was no sadness, just quiet, just space. Sometimes people drift, and sometimes you walk away. And sometimes those things happen at the exact same time and no one notices. And that's the part no one prepares you for, not the leaving, but the fact that you were already gone. The insurance policy came in the mail 2 weeks later, confirmed, processed, tucked into the drawer. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The house still held its shape. The table still stood. But something inside me had changed architecture. I no longer waited to be included. No longer performed gratitude for being noticed. I had unhooked myself. From the gaze, and in the stillness that followed, I found something steadier than approval. I found my own weight, my own rhythm, my own name, said quietly, just once, in my own mind. Enough.